Welcome. You're listening to the Leading Health Podcast by the Kansas Health Foundation. We have a bold vision to make Kansas the healthiest state in the nation. And it's not just a vision, it's a movement powered by people like you. You are one of the 30,000 Kansans invited to help us shift our state's future. We're your hosts, Ed O'Malley and Susan Kang.
In each episode, we move beyond the usual conversation about health, the doctors and deductibles. Instead, we talk about capital H health, our ability to thrive. This is your invitation to grab the Leading Health book and join the conversation as we work together to make Kansas the healthiest state in the nation.
Welcome back to another episode of Leading Health, the podcast where we talk about this book, Leading Health, and how you and 30,000 Kansans help communities thrive. Susan, good to see you.
Great to be here, Ed.
We are into part 2 of the book. The last episode we recorded was just a little miniature episode where we talked about kind of turning into part 2. Excited today to dive into the first chapter of part 2 in detail, which is really about what makes this a leadership challenge, not a health challenge. Excited for that conversation with you today. So excited for our guest, Johnathan Sublet, who will properly introduce here in just a little while. And of course, the reason we're doing all of this is to stimulate conversation among the 30,000 about what it looks like for us to rally together and individually to tackle capital H health, to help Kansas climb the health rankings, to help Kansas return to, in my opinion, its rightful place as one of the healthiest states in the nation. So we are on our way.
I love that.
Let's get the conversation going, right?
All right. What I love about this chapter, and I'm going to ask you a couple of things to help us to land the chapter and, make sure that we're grounded in the things that we should be taking away from this chapter. So as you already indicated, that, health is not really a health challenge, it's a leadership challenge, which is awesome. But talk a little bit more about what that means. Like, why? What makes it a leadership challenge?
And I can imagine that some people might have been skeptical. If they listened to that last little miniature episode, they might have been skeptical when you and I were teeing up the idea of, hey, part 2 is, surprise, it's not a health challenge, it's a leadership challenge. Today, we're going to dive into a little more detail. And there are 3 specific things in this chapter that we lift up. And the whole part 2 of the book is about what makes it a leadership challenge. In this chapter, in chapter 6, we talk about 3 specific things. That this is a leadership challenge because it revolves around things that are important but rarely urgent. So we can talk more about that here in a minute.
Yeah.
The second thing is that progress requires adaptation. Like, it requires evolution. It requires us to stop doing some things, to start doing some new things. It's not the type of problem that can be solved with our current way of operating. So that's another reason why it's another hallmark of a leadership challenge, not more of like a technical challenge. And the third thing we talk about in this chapter, we can get into all these with you and me and with our guest Johnathan here in just a little bit, is the third thing we talk about is it's a leadership challenge because progress requires a clash of values. And so whether we're talking about health, healthcare, or capital H health, or any other subject, when those 3 things are present, when progress requires you to work on things that are important but not urgent, progress requires adaptation, and progress requires a clash of values, you're dealing with a leadership challenge, not a technical challenge that expertise can solve all by itself.
I especially love this idea of important but not urgent. There's so many things on our plate. We have so many important things to do, but the things that get attention are the urgent things, which might not be the thing to be working on in the moment. And so I really, really love that concept, and also about competing values. So Ed, thanks for framing this chapter for us and you mentioning the 3 different concepts that we're going to talk about. But in addition, this chapter also talks about this notion that leadership is mobilizing others to make progress on daunting challenges, and the fact that leadership is an activity, not a position. I love it. You say it's a verb, not a noun. Say more about that.
Yeah, this is a key point of the whole book. And some people who have connected to the Kansas Leadership Center, who've connected with me in the past, know I have very strong feelings about this idea that leadership is an activity, it's not a position.
Mhm.
And the beginning of this chapter tries to make that very clear, tries to land that idea in a succinct way that leadership is specifically the activity, as you said, of mobilizing others to make progress on daunting challenges. And that doesn't happen very often. That is rare. And to me, we're in this bit of a epidemic of, everybody's a leader, all that type of language. I believe firmly that everybody has the potential to exercise leadership. Everybody, I believe, has the opportunity to exercise leadership regardless of their role. Now, that's a big statement. We could unpack that another time. But to me, leadership itself is rare. It's mobilizing people. It's like when somebody does something that mobilizes others to make progress on the most daunting challenges. I don't think we see that happening very often, period. I don't think I do it very often. I don't think anybody does it very often, which is frankly why we need lots of people doing it and lots of people understanding that leadership and authority are two different things. Okay. And you can exercise leadership when you don't have authority, when you're not the city manager, when you're not an elected official, when you're not the pastor, and you can exercise leadership when you do have authority. But most of us don't do it at all.
For the people who are hearing this concept for the first time, it seems like a really hard thing to do. I mean, I don't have the title. How can I, without the title of authority, how do I exercise leadership? What does that look like?
Yeah, so these are big questions, and they require their own podcast series. But the quick answer, the quick kind of thoughts would be something beautiful happens when you think of leadership as an activity rather than a position. And let me go the reverse. When you conflate those things, two really bad things happen. Number one is people assume that the responsibility for solving tough problems are just on quote unquote the leaders, the people in the big jobs.
Right.
So everybody else is off the hook. And then the second bad thing that happens is it heaps way too much pressure on the backs of people in big roles. More pressure than they can handle, more pressure than what should be fair to expect of them. But when we separate those things and we say, no, leadership is an activity, authority is something different, and anybody can exercise leadership, when we separate those two things, it invites so many more people into the conversation. It empowers, just that conceptual understanding empowers people to lead, to experiment with putting themselves out there a little more. But here's something that's so important for us to talk about in the context of this book, because this book is, the subtitle is so important, How You and 30,000 Kansans. And we've already talked about in the series what we mean by the 30,000. Well, what we mean in this book is that the 30,000 are people with authority in civic life. Now, we try to gently say throughout this book, just because they have authority doesn't mean they're exercising leadership. And just because they have authority doesn't mean they're exercising leadership on capital H health. What the book is really about is saying, okay, leadership and authority are two different things. But when it comes to improving health, capital H health, when it comes to helping Kansas climb the health rankings, there is a specific type of leadership we need from those in authority. And that's what this book describes. So in this chapter is the beginning of kind of unpacking that dynamic.
I love that.
Yeah, there's a lot here.
No, there is so much for such a short chapter. Always, this is always the case.
And I think,
so much there.
Yeah, this chapter it's getting at. It's beginning to get at our hopes for the book and for frankly our work in this current era of the Kansas Health Foundation, that we need leadership from all sorts of people across Kansas if we're going to climb the health rankings. Like, one of my biggest fears with this book is that people might assume that we're saying we only need the work of the 30,000. That's not what we're saying at all.
Well, that's not enough.
I would say there's been tremendous work happening across the state from the non-30,000 to work on capital H health. There are beautiful examples. We need the 30,000 to get on board and do their part. And that's what the rest of this book is all about. Let's get Johnathan Sublet up here. Johnathan is one of our closest partners at the Kansas Health Foundation. He's the executive director of SENT, which is an incredible organization in Topeka. He'll tell us a little more about it. He's a pastor. He's a transplant to Kansas, but we're never going to let him go. He's from Texas, but he's in Kansas now. And we have put the word out that he's a Kansan forever by our standards.
Yep.
And we're never going to let him get out of here. Let's get Johnathan up here and join us in this conversation.
Good morning, Johnathan. How are you this morning?
Good morning, Susan. I'm doing well.
Wonderful. So glad to have you on our show.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to the conversation. So let me just tee it off with a question. So we just talked about the importance, why exercising leadership, this is why health is a leadership challenge and not a health challenge. Tell us why, in your mind, it's important for the members of the 30,000 to know that it's a leadership challenge and not a health challenge.
It's important because there is a difference between leading and managing. And sometimes we can come into the nonprofit space and we can think that our role is simply to manage people. And really, that's not the calling. The calling is we are passionate about where we're at because there was something that we said we wanted to solve. You can't solve it if you're trying to manage it. You actually have to be willing to do the risky thing. And so I love the definition in the book that says trying is not leading, that you have to be doing something daunting. I believe every leader should be working on something that could possibly get them fired.
Wow, that's bold.
I love some of the words you just used. And the whole leading versus managing paradigm is a good one we can play with. Like managing implies we're managing a current reality.
Yes.
Leading implies we're heading someplace different. You use the word calling. And I just think you've got to help us out and our listeners out a little bit. I want to know a little bit about your calling.
Yeah. So, my background, I was a chemical engineer for close to 15 years. I started out doing process automation, writing control code for chemical plants. And then from there, I moved into project management, got a Six Sigma black belt. And then I brought that mindset into the nonprofit world. And so a lot of what we do at SENT, which is a holistic community development nonprofit in one of the most under-resourced neighborhoods in all of America, right? We have half our neighborhood has an area deprivation index of 98, the other half 99.
That area deprivation index, it's a national index by census code, if I remember correctly.
Census tract.
Excuse me. Yeah. And it shows the parts of our country that are the most economically deprived. And so when the higher the percentage in your census tract, the more economic deprivation. And so you've got parts of your community that are 98%, 99% on that index.
Yes. And so that means really only 1% of neighborhoods in all of America, according to 16 different factors, are more structurally under-resourced than my neighborhood.
So you have a calling to do something about that, which I just love. And by the way, SENT, we're gonna be all over the map in this conversation because you just know how excited we are about SENT. So we'll have trouble controlling ourselves a little bit to stay focused on the chapter. But we have made a multi-year core support commitment to you and your team. We believe in you. We're learning from you. But talk about, like, what I want to play with here is this idea of how a calling. I'm thinking about the 30,000 right now, like people who might be listening. They got involved in their role, for a calling of some sort, right? Just like you did.
Yes. So there's something inside of all of us that keeps us up at night that says, this needs to be different. This has to be different. And I have been gifted and shaped in a way because of the passions I have, the skill sets that I've built from different realms and different experiences in my life, that I can be a part of the solution. I don't have to hit the home run. I can play buckyball, bunts and singles. I can do that, but in doing that in a consistent manner, then I'm going to lead the way for us to actually win.
But here's what I'm thinking about. The idea is popping in my head for the first time. Almost all the 30,000. My experience is when people, when they run for office, when they get elected, when they get appointed to that really great position in their community, when they become a pastor, when they become a rabbi, when they become kind of a member of the board of the Chamber of Commerce in their community, almost everybody has an idealistic kind of idea of like what they hope to achieve for their community when they get into those roles. But what I'm wondering is the expectations to manage the things they're now asked to manage
Yes.
can kind of like blunt that calling. And I think what I hear in your voice, and I think what we're trying to say in this chapter and in this book a little bit is you go to sleep and you put your head on the pillow at night and you have this beautiful thing that inspires you.
Yes.
Like this book and what we're trying to work on together with Scent at the Kansas Health Foundation, we're
Yes.
trying to unleash that in more fuller ways to create more progress.
Yes. Here's the deal. Part of why I think with the 30,000 and looking at the big H health that we're not closing the gap is that we have too many burnt out leaders. But one of the things I learned about leadership is that burnout is not a result of schedule. Burnout is a result of relationships that are unsettled. And one of the relationships I think is unsettled is the relationship between the managing of the everyday task and the passions for why I got into the work in the first place. And most of us have not been taught about how to manage those. So for me, I want as much of my life to be on set it and forget it as possible. My chapstick on a nightstand in the same place. I don't want my house cleaner to change a single thing about where things are at because I need all those things to be as routine as possible so I can be as passionate as possible. For instance, you've spoken about just in this short amount of time, Ed, how y'all guys want to support us. But there's a couple of big things when we started to partner deeper with KHF that I said, one, Ed doesn't know this. I don't have a position at KHF, but I'm going to do something that takes something off of his plate. We're going to get to a point where Ed never has to think about housing again in Kansas because he's going to have a partner in Scent that is developing housing all across. One of our big goals outside of our organization, this would be the first time anybody heard it, I want to be a part of developing $1 billion of real estate and affordable housing in the state of Kansas, right?
Yeah.
And so how do you start in one of the most under-resourced neighborhoods in all of Kansas and say, we want to attack something that big is because I'm not simply trying to take photo ops and manage the affordable housing problem in Kansas. I'm trying to bring it to an end. If you're not trying to punch at the back of somebody's head, then you're not ever going to make contact with their face. They teach boxers to punch at the back of someone's head if they're trying to hit the person they're fighting in the face. Too many nonprofits are throwing too shallow punches. And so we are never going to close the gap because we are not punching deep enough at the problem. And what that means is yes, I have to set up my systems of hiring and bringing people on a team, of managing the finances for our organization, of how we report and collect data, and all those things, and report outcomes so that I don't think about those things, so that I spend my deep thinking time and my passionate time looking at the big H problems and putting our effort fully there and say, how do we go forward?
You said so many things. I love the example about the chapstick being exactly where you leave it.
Yes.
So you don't have to worry about it.
Yes.
It's routine. It's kind of like Ed having like 17 outfits and just wearing those 17 outfits because he doesn't have to think about
No, not 17 outfits, 17 pieces of clothing.
17 pieces of clothing. Who only has 17? Okay, never mind. But what I'm saying is this is what's, but this was what allows you to, right? Think
Yes.
about punching to the back of the head.
Yes.
You just talked about so many different things. I don't even know where to start to, to start to unwrap that. I'm going to need Ed's help for that.
Yeah, well, let's keep, we're just playing and we're learning all together. But I think, the idea that when we think of something as a leadership challenge, I think what it might do is help us tap into what are our passions for it, what's our purpose for it. When we think of something as a health challenge or this is some wonky language, a content challenge or a technical challenge, I think our mind goes into a space where it's like, well, what do the experts tell us? And if I'm one of those experts, how do I solve this for people? But if we think of it as a leadership challenge, it takes us into the space of like even thinking about our own competing values. So like you've had to invest energy up front to set up a system that allows you to focus on the things that are important but not urgent.
Yes, and so there's a couple of ways I explain that. I said, one, Scent wants to pay the dumb tax as much as possible as we can for other organizations. So that means when we figure something out, when we've invested the dollars, then we're looking at how to share that with it. So now, because of the investment in KHF and different things, we've been able to shift in how we're structured as an organization to where I have more capacity to, a major part of my week is just sharing our model with people from around the country. They either fly in or virtually, and I'm doing coaching sessions and I'm coaching other local leaders. The other thing that I say is Scent wants to be Greek and not Roman. So our goal is not to be imperialistic and to have 100 cents all over Kansas. Our goal is to influence how other nonprofits think about the work of being a nonprofit and community development, and to influence the questions they ask about their work, even if they don't do the same type of work that we do. The Romans, their goal was to be imperialistic, and we have some advantages from them. They built a lot of roads that made a lot of the advances possible, but their civilization died off. Greeks, they wanted to influence what you read and how you thought. And so those are the pieces of literature that still exist to this day that still influence how we think. And that is what I want the legacy of Scent to be, is that even when we're gone, because every organization has a life cycle. I believe you discussed that in your previous episode. Every organization has a life cycle, and ours will come to an end also. But what I hope is our enduring legacy is we change the way nonprofits thought about their work, but by the questions they ask and how they challenge themselves to go after actually closing the gaps and ending the cause for which they were created.
I'd love to hear you just riff a little bit on the idea that we play within this chapter, that leadership is an activity. It's mobilizing people to make progress. And we're pretty clear that we say, like, it doesn't happen very often. Like, it's rare that just because you have a big job doesn't mean you're exercising leadership. And like, how's that shown up in your life? Maybe like a good story, maybe a hard story. I'm just kind of curious.
I'm sure a story that covers both. And so one of the things that I looked at, so we built the first brand new house in our neighborhood in over 60 years back in 2019. But I knew that one house was not going to change it. Normally, when you look at most classical movements, it takes 15% of a group to move, to change before the snowball starts rolling. Dr. King, only 10% of the country marched with Dr. King. So that's the first problem, is most of us spend so much time thinking we got to get 100% of the people on board to impact the change that we want to make. And therefore, we spend so much time planning and spinning our wheels trying to get 100% of people on board before we ever do anything. The second, so when it came to housing, we set an early goal that we want to see 15% of the houses in our neighborhood at the time, the 2,030 houses that existed, that would be 315 houses change in the neighborhood. Now, we didn't think we had to change all those. We just wanted to be the impetus to create the change in the snowball. And then we were going to step out of the neighborhood and let it go on its own. That's our goal. As we've developed over time, now we're developing a 29-acre master plan subdivision. So part of it is a 176 unit apartment complex, $54 million, okay? 106 of those units will use place-based vouchers, because one of our goals is to create a community when someone can go from unsheltered to being a homeowner, and they never have to leave their circle of support, and their kids never have to change schools because of the education ramifications.
I love that.
We created a teacher down payment assistance and retention program where we're providing down payment to teachers who are in our feeder system schools, because that's important. But here's the deal. Across the street, we have this group called Alice. And so you've spoken about that on one of your things. Most programs, if you're a Chodo and you're developing housing, it's for 80% and below area median income. So in most cities, your teachers, your city workers, your county workers, your government workers will never qualify for those houses because of that. And they don't make enough money to go out and purchase on market. The last 3 elections have been won by that group in the middle, that Alice threshold group, who feel like they keep getting left out.
And real quick, ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. It's a term that the United Way helped craft around the nation to describe the working poor. Real quick, you used another term, CHODO.
Yes, Community Housing Development Organization.
There we go.
So you have to be that to use HUD funds. So here's where this goes. We worked with KHF to develop this thing where I called a housing escrow, a renewable fund, where investors can get an actual cash return on developing affordable housing. And we were using that to do unsubsidized housing to be able to fit the people that fell in the gap to get housing. Everybody bought on, had a developer and everything else. Tuesday night, our RHID public hearing, 10-0 vote, city council, go forward. We're going to close and break ground on that in June, okay? Everything was going great with the single house development. And in the meeting with the city on Thursday, now this is after Tuesday, the developer says, I have to step away from the project because my builder is out. It is a personal issue with the builder. Because of not only that project, but some other projects, that was $18 million that walked out the door. I grew up in abject poverty, right? Have you ever lost $18 million in one conversation?
No.
So here's the first thing I had to do. I had to speak to my team first and say, here's what happened. Then to my board, then to both my contact at KHF and at the bank. And I had to thank the person who said I'm walking away from the project and reaffirm them and just their dignity, value, and worth. I had to thank the city. And I had to keep my composure in the moment, but I had enough credits in the bank that by the next morning, I had 3 possible options for somebody to step in. It's hard to, and I had to tell, on the church side, I had to tell our congregation, which Sent and the congregation are totally separate, but the congregation has been supporting the work also, and say, this is a setback. It is not a nail in the coffin. But I've done the routine things well enough that I had enough credits in the bank to still lead in that moment and be able to do that and close that. And so that's the daunting task, because no one wants to stand up and say, we just lost $18 million. But I know it's going to take close to $4 billion to close the 15,000 house shortage that exists in Northeast Kansas.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that story. I'm glad that you have additional options available. I want to get us back to some of the themes in the book about competing values.
Yes.
So when you've experienced competing values,
Yes.
right? Okay. And you've even talked about it, there's sort of the managing versus leading. That's that's in some ways a
Yes.
competing value.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about how you navigate that for you and how you help other people navigate it.
You have to see the greater good. Part of knowing the competing values, for instance, starting in the neighborhood where I started, I could not be donor heavy. Now, being a CHODO, Community Housing Development Organization, a third of your board either has to live in an under-resourced census tract or they have to live in your neighborhood. So that means if I'm in one of the most under-resourced neighborhoods in all of America, that means that if people from my neighborhood, yes, they're going to have tremendous voice, they're going to be boots on the ground, they're going to have a lot of social capital, but they're not going to have the relationships for big donations. I can't build a donor-heavy model. And if you're a new organization, we're only 8 years old. All right. And if that's the case, then I don't have the data that most organizations are going to want to give you a grant. So I couldn't build that. So I had to build a revenue-driven model. And that's what we've built. And we focus on every month in our staff meeting, what % self-sustainability we are. And our whole goal has been bunts and singles. And so we charge. So one of the things, our mental health, we were a mental health desert, physical health desert, food desert. We serve people. Last year, our mental health, our behavioral health division served 15 different Kansas cities and towns, with some people driving as far as 100 miles in one direction to get care from us. If you make 50% or below of the area median income, we give you 6 sessions for free. We had to figure that out. So when we created that, most therapists work on a kind of compensation basis where they get a percentage of what they bill.
Could you help us to tease out a little bit about the different competing values that you're working with?
So the thing is so you're working with this thing where you want to pay your workers. You want the people who don't get care to get care. And you have to come up with systems, though, that allow you to continue to be able to provide those services. So one of the things that we did was figure out a way of how to structure our salaries and the fee for services, where we do charge and different things. We bill insurance, but we have also structured our benefits and different things that way to keep our staff healthy, to make sure they're compensated fairly as possible. And so you're always dealing with that. You're going to get flack from either way. And you have to just deal with that as a leader. And that was a competing values. When you look at healthy neighborhoods, really, if you're going to do healthy neighborhoods, you need mixed income housing. You have to do that. You have to have market rate units to protect the home values. You have to have some lower price units in order to get people who wouldn't normally get in the homes. When you sell a home at market rate or rent a home at market rate, everyone that's living below the line of poverty is going to give you heck. When you sell a home down here, but it's income restricted, and so the people that's living kind of in that Alice threshold can't access it, you're going to get heck from that too. And you just have to deal with, it's not a problem to solve, it's a tension to manage.
I love it. It's probably like also, if you're not getting heck from all sides, you're probably not doing anything.
You're probably not doing anything.
Like that's what you're describing.
Leading is disappointing people at a rate that they can tolerate.
Oh, that's one of my favorite quotes, man.
We just talked about that in one of our
So-
previous chapters.
So again, like this chapter's the first of this part of the book where it's all about how we're trying to shift people's minds that if we're going to improve health, we need, especially these 30,000, to understand that like they have a particular leadership kind of role is the wrong term, that we need a particular expression of leadership from them.
Yes.
And it's like helping people understand that progress is going to require us taking on more risk. That progress is going to require that we tap into the thing that made us want to be one of the 30,000 in the first place. The
Yes.
calling you were talking about. Like if that's not alive in our hearts, we're not going to take the risk.
Yeah, and here's the deal. You have to do things to keep it from dying. When we started Scent had one employee. In 2 weeks, we'll now be up to 28 full-time equivalents on our staff
great.
in 8 years, right? It's a lot easier when it was just me with no wife and no kids to make those hard decisions. But now when I think I have 28 families that my decisions affect whether they're going to eat next month. And
It's amazing.
you have
Yeah.
to think about that,
Right.
but you also have to live in a way that say, it was me leading that allowed them to be a part of the team and be able to function in their passion. And when I stop doing that, that's going to dwindle away also.
So for today's conversation, I feel like the biggest takeaway for me is this notion that, exercising leadership is an activity, not a role or a title
Yes.
or someone. Just because
Yes.
you have the title doesn't mean that you're exercising leadership. And so I invite our listeners, those of you who are who are members of the 30,000, to, despite your title, think deeply about whether you're actually exercising leadership. And then for those of you who are not part of the official 30,000, you don't have the title, but what are things that you can be doing to be exercising leadership in your world?
Yes.
So what is your biggest takeaway?
My biggest takeaway is remember what got you into the work and let that be the thing that gets you up every morning. Lean into that, even on the hard days.
I can't stop thinking about the idea of punching deeper.
Yes.
And that's a great metaphor. And I think what I'm playing with, and I'd encourage listeners to think about, is I think when we punch shallow, so you were saying that boxers are taught punch deeper, punch for the back of the head, and you'll hit the face.
Yes.
It's kind of like Mark Twain said, aim above the mark to hit the mark, when like you're shooting a bow and arrow,
Yeah.
because gravity pulls the arrow down.
Yes.
So you aim above the mark to hit the mark. It's a similar idea, right?
Yes.
But what I'm playing with in my mind is, and I encourage listeners to think about, is if we're punching for the face, that might be treating improving health as a health challenge.
Yes.
I think that pulls us into understanding this is a leadership challenge.
Yes.
We got to be more in.
Yes.
We got to be more committed.
Yes.
We also probably have to be a little more vulnerable.
Yes.
And if we can get over the fear and we can put ourselves in a more vulnerable position, we can take on more risk.
Yes.
We can understand that we're going to have to evolve and change and speak to loss, something we're going to talk about with you in a future chapter.
Yes.
We'll be punching deeper. So great conversation. I do want listeners to know that Johnathan will be back with us a couple more times. I think the next time is going to be chapter 9, I think it is,
Yep.
where we talk about this idea of loss. So Johnathan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Susan, as always, great to hang out with you, and more to come. Thanks, everybody. This is, again, the podcast where we talk about this book, Leading Health. We'll continue the conversation and look forward to the next conversation. Thanks for listening today. Before we leave, there are a couple ways you can help. The first, visit kansashealth.org/leadinghealth to claim your copy of the book and join in the efforts as we work together to make Kansas the healthiest state in the nation. The second is to share this podcast with your network. Also, we'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment from whatever platform you use to get your podcast.